At the head of this force, known as the New Model Army, was Oliver Cromwell. To this day, Cromwell remains a dark silhouette against the blood-stained backdrop of Irish history. He stands accused of war crimes, religious persecution, and ethnic cleansing on a dramatic scale. The English writer G.K. Chesterton said of Cromwell's conquest of Ireland that it was a tragic necessity that the Irish should remember it, but far more tragic that the English forgot it.
The human cost was enormous. Between 1/5 and 1/4 of the civilian population perished in the years 1649, 50, 51, 52 and into 53. That is Cromwell's legacy.
It's part of a cycle of violence, but the escalation of that cycle of violence has to be the biggest single reason why there has been problems between the communities here and between the islands of Britain and Ireland ever since.
Cromwell inadvertently played a key role in the development of modern Irish nationalism, as the shared experience of violent persecution and dispossession forged a sense of common identity among the Catholic peoples of Ireland. So who was this man? Why had he come? And what is the truth behind one of the most harrowing and controversial episodes in Irish history?
We are come to ask an account of the innocent blood that hath been shed. We come to break the power of a company of lawless rebels. We come, by the assistance of God, to hold forth and to maintain the lustre and glory of English liberty in a nation where we have an undoubted right to it!
Ireland, 400 years ago, a divided and troubled country. Since the Anglo-Norman invasion of 1169, the native Irish had resisted successive attempts by the English crown to control the island. The defeat of Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601 signalled the end of the old Gaelic political order. Queen Elizabeth's successor, James I, now adopted a radical policy that would dramatically alter the course of Irish history: the Ulster Plantation. Tens of thousands of English and Scottish Protestants migrated across the Irish Sea to Ulster, settling on lands that had previously been inhabited by native Irish Catholics. The descendants of the original Anglo-Norman settlers were known as the Old English. Like the native Irish, they had remained true to the Catholic faith. Both groups were determined to resist the English government's efforts to impose the Protestant religion.
Is dordige dalav de has le tiadiv de queer Saxonig I lebig ngoel nglam is transplantation chach le hele.
But how could such an extensive policy of colonization be justified? In the early 17th century, the English began to expand their territories across the globe, in North America, the Caribbean, and India. In many ways, Ireland acted as a laboratory for empire, enabling the English to test out new policies closer to home before exporting them overseas.
The whole process of civilizing Ireland was complicated. On one hand, it involved the use of force, sheer military power, to to overcome and subdue Ireland. On the other, it involves exposing Irish people to English customs, habits, language, legal practices, and, of course, the Protestant religion.
Elizabeth's successor, King James, may well have hoped for the peaceful acceptance of his civilising mission by the native population. But colonial officials on the ground favoured a policy of discrimination and dispossession, which in turn provoked resentment and resistance. The English identity was increasingly associated with the Protestant faith, and Irishness with Catholicism. The resulting ethnic and religious tensions threatened to tear the country apart. In 1625, James I died and was succeeded by his son, Charles I, who insisted on political and religious conformity throughout the three Stuart kingdoms of England, Scotland and Ireland. His policies triggered a revolt by Scottish Presbyterians in the late 1630s. The success of the Scots inspired Irish Catholics to make plans for their own rebellion. On the 22nd of October 1641, Sir Phelim O'Neill, the leading O'Neills still resident in Ireland, seized Charlemont Fort in County Armagh. Before long, he controlled most of South Ulster.
The storming of Wexford happens while Cromwell and Cromwell's officers are in negotiation with the governor and townspeople about the surrender. And that's hard to explain away. Cromwell does so to his own satisfaction by invoking in God, divine retribution. God would have it so. But we, alas, must be less content.
That does raise the question of whether he just lost control at Wexford. It's possible he didn't want a second massacre, that one was enough, and the absence of any record of Cromwell's reflections on what he did at Wexford is obviously a queasy conscience, either that he didn't want the English to meditate on a second massacre, or he didn't want to own up to the fact that he'd lost control of his men. But certainly Wexford is more problematic in a way than Drogheda.
Catholic clergy were deliberately targeted. As at Drogheda, a number were executed in cold blood.
In some ways, Cromwell is an absolutely classic Puritan. He's a Puritan in the sense that he has a hatred of idolatry, which he associates both with the Anglican Church and with the Roman Catholic Church. He hates the Catholic clergy, who he think confuse people and confuse the Catholics and keep the scriptures from them.
I meddle not with any man's conscience, but if by liberty of conscience they mean the liberty to exercise the Mass, I judge it best to use plain dealing and to let them know that where the Parliament of England have power, it will not be allowed.
Cromwell gave no specific order for the slaughter of Wexford's civilian population, but as Commander-in-Chief, he must be held responsible for the excesses of his troops.
Historians have argued that he was simply following the rules of early modern warfare, and in that sense should be excused from having the blame for the bloodlettings, especially at Drogheda and at Wexford, laid at his feet. In my opinion, there is no doubt that there was an excess used and that he abused his position and allowed his men to act with unnecessary brutality.
Despite his successes at Drogheda and Wexford, the hard fighting and harsh weather was taking its toll on the Parliamentary Army. The fate of Cromwell's campaign now hung in the balance. His forces were exposed to the elements and vulnerable to a royalist counterattack. Cromwell faced the prospect of a difficult retreat to Dublin through hostile territory, unless he could cross the River Barrow, swollen by winter rains, and push on into Munster, to the Protestant-controlled towns of Cork, Youghal and Kinsale. Ormond would never have a better opportunity to avenge the crushing defeats at Drogheda and Wexford. But the great general, after 4 decades of constant campaigning, his body racked by disease, was in fact dying. Owen Roe died on the 6th of November 1649 at Clough-Uachtar Castle in County Cavan. His death was a crushing blow to the hopes of Irish Catholics.
By his death, the enemy has grown strong and cruel. For now, the enemy does not fear the name of General Owen O'Neill, which not long before did sound like a thunderbolt in his ears. As long as he breathed life, we were to stand in possession of this land. Now all is whipped and snatched out of our hands.
Owen Roe's nephew, Major General Hugh Dove O'Neill, now emerged from his shadow. Born in Spain, this veteran of the Continental Wars commanded 2,000 experienced soldiers of the Ulster Army. These troops would soon come face to face with Cromwell. The fate of Catholic Ireland rested in their hands.
Hooray! Marshal!
After the break, we conclude Cromwell, God's executioner, as Oliver's army unexpectedly begins to founder. Disease and bad weather prove to be more than a temporary setback, and the Irish start to feel victory is possible.